When he was sending me Django, he actually didn't want to tell me that I wasn't going to be Django.
You're as crazy as the people on Twitter. Right. I'm not Laurence Fishburne.
At 76 years old, Samuel L. Jackson has reached a point in his career where he no longer cares about Hollywood's carefully staged smiles or the politics that happen when the cameras stop rolling. For decades, he's been one of the most recognizable and respected actors alive, carrying a reputation for speaking his mind, taking no nonsense, and cutting through Hollywood's fakery with a single glare. But now, he's taking it one step further. In a rare, brutally honest moment, Jackson makes it clear that he's finished playing by the unwritten rules of the industry. No more fake handshakes, no more polite interviews that dance around the truth. This time, he's torching bridges in plain view. And what he's revealed has stunned fans, critics, and insiders alike. It started with a bit of humor, Samuel clarifying once again that he is not Laurence Fishburne, that he's not the other guy in that commercial. For years, Jackson has laughed off the mix-ups, but beneath the sarcasm was a deeper frustration. At 76, he doesn't have the patience for those mistakes anymore. And if you think that irritation is only about mistaken identity, think again. Because behind the wit and the jokes, Jackson has dropped a bombshell. He's named names, 5 of them, 5 actors he simply cannot stand. And once you hear who's on that list, you'll understand why Hollywood itself is holding its breath. For more than half a century, Samuel L. Jackson has been one of the most unstoppable forces in film. His movies have raked in over $27 billion worldwide, making him the highest-grossing actor in cinema history. But beyond the numbers, Jackson built his reputation on something far more valuable: his refusal to bow to Hollywood politics. Unlike so many others, Sam never played the quiet game. He's always been blunt, fearless, and unafraid to challenge the system when it tried to put him in a box. And time after time, he proved he had the power to win. When Steven Spielberg came calling, Jackson wasn't afraid to say no, not once but twice. When George Lucas wanted to fit him into Star Wars on his own terms, Sam flipped the script and made Lucas rewrite it. And when Marvel tried to lowball him for Nick Fury, Jackson laid it out plainly: double the paycheck or the eye patch disappears. Now, after decades of victories, Jackson is ready to reveal something even bigger: his personal can't stand club. Spike Lee, from dream ally to enemy number one. In the late 1980s, Samuel L. Jackson and Spike Lee seemed destined to become an unstoppable duo. At the time, Spike was more than just a filmmaker. He was a cultural revolution. His movies carried an energy that Hollywood couldn't ignore. Unapologetically black, politically sharp, and fiercely independent. And right there, riding the wave of this revolution, was a hungry and talented actor named Samuel L. Jackson. The two clicked almost instantly. Spike opened doors for Sam, casting him in School Days, 1988, giving him a moment in Do the Right Thing, 1989, and later handing him roles in Mo Better Blues and Jungle Fever. These weren't just supporting parts, they were stepping stones. Each role pushed Jackson further into the spotlight, but none more dramatically than his haunting portrayal of Gator, the crack-addicted brother in Jungle Fever. That performance was so raw, so terrifyingly authentic, that it shook the Cannes Film Festival to its core. The jury was so blown away, they created a new award on the spot just to honor him: Best Supporting Actor. It was a category Cannes had never used before, and they've never used it again since. For Samuel L. Jackson, this was more than a breakout. It was a resurrection. Fresh out of rehab, still detoxing, he poured every ounce of pain and vulnerability into Gator. It wasn't just acting, it was survival. With Spike and Sam side by side, fans and critics alike imagined the two as the next great cinematic partnership, the Scorsese and De Niro of black cinema, but bolder, louder, and unapologetically rooted in their own culture. It looked like destiny. But destiny had other plans. By 1992, Spike was preparing for his magnum opus, Malcolm X. This wasn't just another film. It was his career-defining project, a monumental civil rights epic that required precision, passion, and loyalty. Naturally, Spike wanted Jackson involved. He offered him the role of Baines, the man who introduces Malcolm to Islam while in prison, a character both pivotal and profound. Jackson auditioned. He nailed it. By all accounts, the part was his. But then came the problem. Spike offered Sam scale plus 10, the absolute minimum salary allowed by the Screen Actors Guild. For Jackson, who had just blown audiences away at Cannes, it felt like an insult. He wasn't a struggling stage actor anymore. He was a rising star. He wanted respect, and respect meant being paid fairly. Instead of taking the role, Jackson walked away. But what stung Spike wasn't just the rejection, it was how the message was delivered. Jackson didn't call him directly. His agent did. To Spike, that single move was a betrayal. He believed their bond was deeper than contracts, stronger than agents. To him, Jackson should have picked up the phone, man to man, and explained. But Sam didn't see it that way. To him, Spike's expectation reeked of entitlement. Why should he owe eternal gratitude just because Spike gave him early breaks? Jackson felt he had earned his place, elevated Spike's films with his energy, and deserved to be compensated accordingly. Their collaboration wasn't charity. It was a partnership. The fallout was brutal. Their friendship shattered, and a decades-long Cold War began. For 22 years, they didn't collaborate. No roles, no public acknowledgments, no gestures of reconciliation. While Spike went on to craft his legacy as a director, Jackson built his empire through Quentin Tarantino, George Lucas, and eventually Marvel. The tension between them became an open secret in Hollywood. And when Spike publicly criticized Tarantino's use of racial slurs in Django Unchained, Jackson didn't stay silent. He clapped back hard, telling reporters that Spike needed to shut the fuck up. The feud was no longer whispers. It was loud, raw, and undeniable. What made it worse was the irony. Jackson has often admitted that Jungle Fever, the very film Spike gave him, didn't just make his career, it literally saved his life. Yet here he was, decades later, treating Spike less like a mentor and more like a rival. That contradiction wasn't lost on anyone watching. Then, unexpectedly, the ice began to thaw. In 2013, their wives reconnected and slowly pulled the two men back into the same orbit. They began having dinners together, cautiously at first, but with time, the old wounds seemed to soften. Spike eventually cast Jackson in his remake of Oldboy, marking their first on-screen reunion in over 2 decades. Jackson later admitted the collaboration felt surprisingly natural, like no time had passed. "He doesn't get in my way artistically," Jackson said. "Whatever I come with, and it's cool." But reconciliation doesn't erase history. The scars were still there, buried beneath polite dinners and professional courtesy. Everyone in Hollywood knew the truth, the betrayal, the bitterness, the years of silence. For Jackson, those memories don't disappear, and that's why, when he finally revealed his Can't Stand Club, Spike Lee's name was right at the top. To Jackson, Spike represented both the best and the worst of his career, the man who gave him his breakthrough, but also the man who tried to underpay him, control him, and guilt him into loyalty. Their story wasn't just about art. It was about power, respect, and the refusal to bend. Spike demanded loyalty. Jackson demanded freedom. Neither man was willing to compromise. That's the real tragedy of their broken brotherhood. They could have been legends together, rewriting Hollywood history as an unstoppable duo. Instead, they became rivals, two giants forever linked by the brilliance of their early work and the bitterness of their fallout. And so, out of the 5 names Samuel L. Jackson revealed, Spike Lee didn't just make the list. He became enemy number 1. Quentin Tarantino, from soulmate to fractured brotherhood. For years, Samuel L. Jackson and Quentin Tarantino looked like the perfect Hollywood marriage. 6 films together, countless iconic moments, and some of the most unforgettable performances in modern cinema. From Jules Winfield's thunderous monologues in Pulp Fiction to the chilling menace of Steven in Django Unchained, Jackson wasn't just another actor reading lines. He became the heartbeat of Tarantino's storytelling. Fans saw it, critics saw it. Even Tarantino admitted once that no one could deliver his long, profanity-packed speeches like Jackson. "Sam says it like poetry," Tarantino confessed, and he wasn't wrong. Jackson's voice, his timing, his unmistakable cool transformed Tarantino's dense dialogue into something alive, electric, and unforgettable. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The very thing that made their partnership legendary also planted the seeds of its destruction. Fans began whispering. Maybe Jackson wasn't just performing the words, maybe he was shaping them. Maybe the swagger, the flavor, the rhythm wasn't written on the page, but came straight from Jackson himself. And sometimes, those whispers were true. One of Pulp Fiction's most famous lines, the sly, cool in the gang moment, wasn't Tarantino's at all. It was pure Jackson ad-lib. And Tarantino hated that. For a director who saw his scripts as gospel, word-for-word sacred text, the idea that fans thought his star was rewriting his genius stung like salt in a wound. In interviews, Tarantino grew defensive, even snapping that he wrote all of Jackson's dialogue, no matter how it sounded. It was pride talking, but also pain. Because whether he liked it or not, people were giving Jackson credit for the very thing Tarantino valued most: his writing. The tension stayed mostly hidden for years, masked by the success of their collaborations. But like all pressure, it was bound to explode. Fast forward to 2024. Pulp Fiction was celebrating its 30th anniversary at the TCM Classic Film Festival. Fans expected nostalgia, warmth, and smiles as Tarantino and Jackson shared the stage. Instead, what they saw was ice. The vibe was awkward, the body language stiff, and the side eyes impossible to miss. Tarantino did what he always does. He analyzed his work, dissecting it with the confidence of a man who believes his films are cinematic scripture. But Jackson wasn't about to let him take all the glory. With a subtle but deadly jab, he interrupted. What separates Tarantino movies from everyone else's is how much time is spent saying who you are and how you feel. Translation? Jackson was saying, "It's not your camera angles, Quentin. It's me. I made those characters iconic." The room felt the cut, and the cut went deep. But the feud wasn't just about ego over dialogue. It soon spilled into something much bigger, the philosophy of cinema itself. When Tarantino went on a podcast and trashed Marvel, calling Marvel actors not real movie stars and dismissing them as placeholders for franchise names, he struck a nerve. After all, Samuel L. Jackson is Marvel. For nearly 2 decades, he's embodied Nick Fury, the mastermind behind the Avengers, the face of one of the most successful franchises in film history. Jackson didn't let it slide. On live television, he fired back. Sitting on The View, he shot down Tarantino's claim with one brutal fact. Chadwick Boseman is Black Panther. You can't refute that. And he's a movie star. It wasn't just a clapback, it was a declaration of war. Because at that moment, the lines were drawn. Tarantino represented cinema as high art, movies as sacred, serious works meant to be studied, dissected, and placed on pedestals. Jackson represented cinema as cultural force, movies that live in people's hearts, that spark movements, that turn into symbols far beyond critics' approval. To Tarantino, superhero blockbusters were shallow distractions. To Jackson, they were proof that art doesn't need Oscars to matter, that cultural impact could be just as powerful as critical acclaim. And when one man insists that cinema belongs in ivory towers, while the other insists it belongs to the people, there's no common ground. What once looked like a legendary bromance had become a battle of philosophies. For years, Jackson elevated Tarantino's scripts into pop culture history. But now, the power dynamic has flipped. Jackson no longer bows at the altar of Tarantino. He doesn't need to. He's a global icon, a box office juggernaut, a man who has built a legacy without begging for validation from Hollywood elites. Tarantino may have given him some of his most famous roles, but Jackson refuses to let anyone, even Quentin, box him in. That's why Tarantino, once his creative soulmate, now sits firmly on Jackson's hate list. Because at the end of the day, this feud isn't just about credit for a line or a Marvel insult. It's about freedom versus control. Tarantino demands absolute authority. Jackson demands independence. And when two men with egos that large collide, someone has to lose. This time, Samuel L. Jackson decided it wouldn't be him. Laurence Fishburne. When respect turns into shade. In Hollywood, respect is everything. Careers are built not only on talent but on reputation, perception, and the way stories get told years after the cameras stop rolling. And for Samuel L. Jackson, few relationships highlight the fine line between respect and disrespect more than his complicated history with Laurence Fishburne. On paper, the two men should have been allies. Both were acclaimed black actors rising through the ranks in the late 80s and early 90s, both respected for their craft and both destined to become household names. Yet their paths rarely crossed on screen, and when they did intersect behind the scenes, the fallout left scars that Jackson never forgot. The story begins with Pulp Fiction, the 1994 cult classic that catapulted Jackson into superstardom. His portrayal of Jules Winfield, the philosophical hitman delivering Bible-quoting monologues with terrifying intensity, became one of cinema's most iconic roles. But here's the twist most fans don't know. That role wasn't supposed to be his. Quentin Tarantino originally offered Jules to Laurence Fishburne. At the time, Fishburne was already established and respected, and Tarantino thought he'd be perfect, but Fishburne turned it down. His reason? He didn't like the script. He didn't buy into Tarantino's vision. He walked away from what would become one of the most defining films of the decade. Jackson stepped in, auditioned, and made the role his own. The result? Pulp Fiction didn't just elevate him, it cemented his place in Hollywood forever. Years later, though, Fishburne made comments that reopened an old wound. In an interview, he casually remarked that he didn't regret passing on Pulp Fiction because, in his words, he contributed to Jackson's success simply by staying out of the way. To most, it might have sounded like harmless commentary, but to Jackson, those words cut deep. Contributed? It wasn't Fishburne who delivered that unforgettable Ezekiel 25:17 speech. It wasn't Fishburne who turned a quirky indie film into a global pop culture moment. It wasn't Fishburne who poured sweat and rage into Jules Winfield. Jackson did that, and he earned it. So when Fishburne implied that his refusal was a kind of gift to Jackson, it came across less like humility and more like arrogance. As if Sam's greatest performance was just a hand-me-down, a role he was lucky to scoop up because Fishburne couldn't be bothered. For a man like Jackson, who spent decades clawing his way up from stage plays and small roles, that kind of shade was personal. The tension bubbled quietly until it exploded in one of the most infamous live TV interviews of Jackson's career. A reporter mistakenly identified him as, you guessed it, Laurence Fishburne. On air, in real time, Jackson lit the reporter up. I'm not Laurence Fishburne. We don't all look alike. We may all be black and famous, but we don't all look alike. You are busted. The clip went viral instantly. Fans laughed, headlines rolled, but beneath the sarcasm was something deeper: frustration. Jackson wasn't just correcting a clueless journalist. He was venting decades of irritation at being compared, confused, and diminished, always lumped together with Fishburne as though they were interchangeable. For Sam, this wasn't about vanity. It was about respect. He had carved out his own identity, built his own legend, and yet he still found himself in Fishburne's shadow in ways that had nothing to do with talent and everything to do with perception. And when Fishburne implied that Pulp Fiction was his gift to Jackson, it only reinforced the idea that Sam's success was somehow second-hand. What made the situation even more frustrating was the silence. Unlike his feud with Spike Lee, which was loud, raw, and public, the Cold War with Fishburne stayed quiet. No public blowouts, no fiery reconciliations, just an icy distance. Insiders whispered that the two never really addressed it. No heart-to-heart, no clearing of the air, just subtle digs, awkward silences at industry events, and an undercurrent of tension fans could feel even when they shared the same space. And so the rivalry lingered, not dramatic enough to make headlines every week, but deep enough to burn. Because when you're Samuel L. Jackson, a man who built his career on force, honesty, and authenticity, being confused with someone who once seemed to diminish your biggest triumph is more than an annoyance. It's an insult. That's why Laurence Fishburne landed on Jackson's list of actors he can't stand. Not because of one role or one comment or one awkward interview, but because of everything those moments represented. Disrespect, arrogance, and the refusal to give credit where it was due. In Hollywood, legacies are fragile. They're shaped not just by what you do, but by what people say about you, how they remember you, and who they confuse you with. For Jackson, Jules Winfield wasn't a leftover. It was destiny. It was blood, sweat, and rage turned into art. And the last thing he'll ever accept is someone suggesting it was a gift. So while fans might laugh at the viral interview and dismiss it as a funny misunderstanding, for Jackson, it was the breaking point. Respect matters. And when respect turns into shade, there's no going back. George Lucas, the Star Wars betrayal. For millions of fans around the world, Samuel L. Jackson's purple lightsaber isn't just a piece of movie trivia, it's legend. His role as Mace Windu in the Star Wars prequels gave him the chance to step into one of the most iconic franchises of all time. The calm authority, the sharp gaze, the no-nonsense delivery, it was classic Jackson, reimagined in a galaxy far, far away. But behind the Jedi robes and the galactic battles, there's a darker story, one that reveals how Hollywood power plays, ego, and backroom deals can rewrite not only characters but careers. It all started with Jackson himself. He openly admitted he begged to be in Star Wars. He wasn't picky. He told George Lucas he'd be happy as a nameless stormtrooper running across the screen. He just wanted in. Lucas eventually gave him more than a walk-on. He gave him Mace Windu, a member of the Jedi Council, complete with the one thing no other Jedi had, a purple lightsaber, added at Jackson's personal request. For a while, it looked like a dream come true. But dreams in Hollywood have a way of souring. As production moved forward, storylines shifted. Originally, Mace Windu's fate wasn't to be struck down by Emperor Palpatine in Revenge of the Sith. Instead, the plan was bold and poetic. Boba Fett, the son of Jango Fett, would avenge his father's death by killing the Jedi who had executed him. It would have tied the saga together, giving the young bounty hunter a defining arc. Actor Daniel Logan, who played young Boba Fett in Attack of the Clones, was told to expect a major comeback. But that arc never happened. According to Logan, the storyline was scrapped because Samuel L. Jackson intervened. Jackson reportedly told Lucas that some punk kid shouldn't be able to take down a Jedi Council member. In his eyes, letting Boba Fett kill Mace Windu diminished the authority of the Jedi and, more importantly, the stature of his character. Lucas listened. The script shifted. Instead of dying at the hands of a vengeful boy, Mace Windu was given a high-profile exit, facing off against Chancellor Palpatine in a dramatic lightsaber duel. Logan, meanwhile, was left waiting for a call that never came. His potential storyline disappeared, and with it, much of the momentum that might have carried his career forward. Logan has spoken about it at conventions for years, hinting at how one decision behind closed doors derailed his long-term trajectory in Hollywood. But Jackson, he's never addressed it publicly. No confirmation, no denial, no apology. Just silence. And that silence speaks volumes. In the Star Wars universe, death is rarely permanent. Darth Maul was sliced in half, yet returned. Emperor Palpatine himself survived a fall into a reactor shaft. If Lucasfilm wanted to bring Windu back, they could. But the fact that Boba Fett's revenge arc was scrapped entirely suggests more than just storytelling preference. It suggests power. And in this case, Samuel L. Jackson had it. For fans, the betrayal cuts two ways. On the one hand, Jackson brought charisma and gravitas to Mace Windu, making him one of the most memorable Jedi in the saga. On the other hand, the alleged behind-the-scenes maneuvering reinforced the darker truth of Hollywood. Stars with clout can shape outcomes, even if it costs someone else their big break. That's why George Lucas ends up on Jackson's Can't Stand Club. Not because the two hated each other personally, but because Lucas allowed those politics to play out. Instead of protecting the original storyline or balancing opportunities for both actors, he sided with his star. And by doing so, he reinforced the unwritten rules of Hollywood. The bigger your name, the louder your voice in the room. For Jackson, Mace Windu was a triumph. For Daniel Logan, it was the role that got away. And for George Lucas, it was a choice that turned what could have been one of the saga's most poetic revenge arcs into just another example of how power gets wielded when no one's watching. In the end, Samuel L. Jackson got his lightsaber, his heroic exit, and his immortal place in the Star Wars pantheon. But the cost was another actor's future, and Lucas's complicity in a system that plays favorites. And that's why, for all the smiles on set and the galactic glory on screen, George Lucas finds himself on Samuel L. Jackson's hate list. Denzel Washington, rival kings of Hollywood. Not every rivalry is loud. Some aren't fought with insults, interviews, or public spats. Some are quieter, simmering just beneath the surface, built not on hatred, but on competition. And when it comes to Samuel L. Jackson and Denzel Washington, the tension isn't about feuds. It's about two men who became kings in completely different kingdoms. On the surface, the two men show respect. They smile for cameras, praise each other's work, and never throw direct shade. But the truth is written in their careers. For more than 3 decades, these two icons have moved in parallel, dominating the industry, but never side by side. Denzel Washington carved out his empire through drama, prestige, and artistry. He became the actor's actor, the craftsman who disappeared so completely into his roles that audiences forgot they were watching Denzel at all. His performances in films like Glory, Malcolm X, and Training Day earned him not just acclaim, but Oscars, 2 golden statues that cemented his legacy as one of Hollywood's greatest dramatic performers. Samuel L. Jackson took a completely different path. Instead of chasing awards, he chased impact. He became the powerhouse, the voice, the icon whose presence alone could turn a scene into legend. From Pulp Fiction to Star Wars to nearly 2 decades as Nick Fury in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Jackson built a legacy on global reach. His films have grossed more than $27 billion worldwide, more than any other actor in history. He didn't need Oscars. He built his crown from box office numbers and cultural dominance. The flashpoint between them came in 2001. Antoine Fuqua was casting Training Day, the gritty cop drama that would redefine careers. Samuel L. Jackson wanted the role of Alonzo Harris, the crooked, charismatic detective at the heart of the story. But the part went to Denzel Washington, who didn't just play it, he owned it. His performance was magnetic, terrifying, unforgettable. It won him his 2nd Academy Award, and instantly became one of the most iconic roles of his career. For Jackson, that was a bitter pill. Here was a role he believed he could crush, handed instead to the man already seen as Hollywood's most serious black leading actor. That decision didn't just divide one film, it split their careers into opposite lanes. Denzel became the face of prestige, heavy dramas, morally complex characters, awards, season dominance. He built his own production company, giving himself the power to choose stories that matched his vision. His empire was artistry. Jackson doubled down on blockbusters. While Denzel avoided CGI-heavy franchises, Sam embraced them. Marvel, Star Wars, Tarantino's universe, he thrived in larger-than-life stories that turned into pop culture landmarks. His empire was brand power. And maybe that's the real reason Hollywood has never put them on screen together. Studios know what it would mean. Two kings clashing, two audiences colliding, two styles so radically different they might not blend. Instead, they've been kept apart, each ruling his own kingdom. Not enemies, not friends, rivals. The irony is that both men are essential to Hollywood, but in opposite ways. Denzel represents the purity of the craft, the respect of peers, the weight of Oscars, the prestige of serious cinema. Jackson represents cultural impact, the fan adoration, the billion-dollar franchises, the ability to dominate box offices on a global scale. Together they are two halves of the same coin, but separately, they became legends in their own right. And that's why Denzel Washington makes Samuel L. Jackson's list. Not out of hatred, but out of competition, because in Hollywood, there's only room for one king in each kingdom. And when two kings rise at the same time, they don't share thrones. They rule separately, forever watching, forever compared, forever rivals. After more than 5 decades in Hollywood, Samuel L. Jackson has finally said what so many others are too afraid to admit. His Can't Stand Club isn't just gossip. It's a raw look at how power, pride, and politics shape the industry behind the curtain. These stories remind us that even legends carry scars, and that success doesn't erase betrayal, ego, or competition. But there's a lesson here. Whether you're in Hollywood or in everyday life, respect matters. Loyalty matters. And the way people treat each other when no one's watching often defines legacies more than awards or box office numbers ever could. So what do you think? Was Jackson right to name names? Or should some battles remain in the shadows? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more untold stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell.